So we're going to continue this conversation. You know, New Deal is really blessed to work with a lot of great organizations, both on policy and on politics. I think it's very true to say that there's been no stronger partner for New Deal since our beginning than Third Way. We've been so proud to work with them on messaging, on policy ideas. Lanae Erickson is the Senior Vice President for Social Politics and Social Policy and Politics at Third Way. She's done some amazing work both on the policy space, immigration, choice, education, and others. I love her thoughtful political analysis. I was trying to remember exactly what it was, but the first people to remind us all a few years ago that Twitter was not the real political world. One of my favorite things they did. But Lanae has been heading up the charge at Third Way to do some polling heading into this election and the focus groups coming out of it. So I'm super excited to have her with us to tell us what she's been seeing. So Lanae.
Thanks, Debbie. And I think Simon always has the fun job of being the cheerleader, but I have the job of maybe adding a few grains of salt to what he just said. So don't fault me for the data that you're about to see. So like most of you, I had been basically not breathing until election day, and then election week I got to breathe a little bit again. And I'm sure that many of you felt the same way. We kept the Senate. We have lots of great friends who won really, really tough races in the House. We were able to flip some chambers. The insurrectionist speaker is going to have a tiny majority to work with, and we were able to turn away many of the election deniers that were running for statewide races where they really could have wreaked a lot of havoc in 2024. So really happy about all of that. But now we have to figure out what these results mean for how we win in 2024, because we know that that is going to be an epic election that really is going to determine the future of our democracy. So I think that you will recognize this takeaway. There is absolutely one lesson from this election, and it is that Democrats won where we were seen as the mainstream alternative to Republican extremism. That's it. I can stop my PowerPoint right now. We can get back on time and save you the rest of this talk. That's it. That's what you all did in order to win your races. That's what we saw across the country, and it also defines some of the different results that we saw in different states that Simon was talking about. So there's 4 proof points that I would give to you in order to think about this big takeaway. First is the primaries. The primaries are where it starts. We're going to talk a little bit about how we won them. The second is persuasion. The third is outperformance, but I like alliteration, so performance. And the fourth is progressive losses. So let's start where the voters did with the primaries. Despite a lot of very, very loud voices on the left, and despite a few really tough losses, Molly Gray is here somewhere, we mostly won the primaries. The mainstream folks mostly won the primaries. The New Dem Action Fund had a 77% win rate in Democratic primaries compared to Our Revolution and Justice Dems, who had a much lower win rate. Thank you very much, Catherine, for all of your hard work. So our voters chose the mainstream choices, and they've done it again and again. We care about electability. This is a benefit for us, right? Their folks don't care about electability. 70% of the Republican candidates for Congress questioned the legitimacy of the 2020 election. 7 in 10. This is a benefit that we can use moving forward, that our voters actually care whether our candidates can win, and theirs increasingly don't. And then when we get to the general election, it turns out general election voters notice that difference. We did a pre-election poll just before November 8th with the Welcome Pack. Thank you folks over here. And what we found was most voters thought that the Republican candidates were more extreme than the Democrats. They were right. But by 7 points, which party has nominated the more extreme candidates this cycle? Republicans. 7 points is fine, but it was 20 points among swing voters. This was a defining moment where we put forward the decisive mainstream candidates and swing voters noticed. The second proof point is persuasion. Now, there's common wisdom in DC, you'll hear it all over the place. Midterms are only about turnout. Just get your people to the polls. That's the only thing you have to do. Yet again, that common wisdom was proven horribly wrong this election cycle. So when you look at AP VoteCast, which is widely seen as kind of more legitimate than exit polling, which has some problems at this point, you can see who came out to vote. It turns out Republicans had a turnout advantage by 6 points. Their people came out. But what happened was that we persuaded independents. We delivered because we persuaded these folks to come with us. And it was even more evident in key races. This is the national polling, but when you look at these key races, every single Senate and gubernatorial candidate that won more than 50% of independents. And some of them won up to 65% of independent voters. That's insane. You can't win with turnout when the other party is winning independent voters by 30 points. It's decisive. This is how we put together this winning coalition. And you can also really see this phenomenon with the split ticket voters. You know, we did some pre-election focus groups, or some post-election focus groups, 7 rounds of focus groups across the country with different kinds of voters. And they talked about the candidates over and over again. They said, you know, I'm a Kemp, Warnock voter, but I'm really worried about Kemp on abortion, so I voted for Democrats down ballot. Or I'm a Mark Kelly, Carrie Lake voter, which is crazy, but I'm worried about homelessness and crime, and so I voted for Republicans down ballot. And we saw this in the numbers as well. There were big differences between candidates that were running in the same state. So we saw that where we could win this mainstream versus extreme argument, we were able to prevail, but sometimes we didn't. So let's talk about that outperformance. You, the candidates, mattered. Candidate quality was very important this cycle, everyone will say so. We put our best foot forward, and it is very clear they did not. But those results do not mean that Democrats are beloved by the voters that just chose us. Those who actually won, including people in this room, had to seriously outperform our generic brand. They had to build their own brand and really make sure that the voters knew that they weren't a generic Democrat. That is not a strong position to go into in 2024. Let me give you some examples. So in this pre-election poll, we asked about perceptions of the party. We asked lots of questions about values, how you think about Democrats and Republicans, and the results are not pretty. An equal number of voters think that both parties have gotten more extreme over the last few years. An equal number think that Democrats and Republicans are currently extreme, and we lose by 2 points on who shares my values. That's not a good place to start from. So why is it that people don't think Democrats share their values? Well, look at 2 of the most important values that are up here. Valuing hard work. That is a crucial piece of the American story. We believe in valuing hard work, and they think Republicans value it 15 points more than we do. Look at patriotism, a core value for Americans. Republicans who, tried to attack the Capitol and kill Capitol police officers are 10 points more patriotic than we are. That's not a good place to be. This is vis-a-vis our current Republican Party, and we are losing on these values. So when you add up all of these perceptions, what do you get? You get a Democratic Party that voters think, as a generic choice, is further away from themselves than the Republican Party is. It's a scary thing. So we asked voters to plot themselves on this ideological scale. 0 means completely liberal, 10 means completely conservative, 5 is right in the middle. You can see that voters and swing voters put themselves just to the right of center. But they put Democrats and Republicans basically equally away from center, equally extreme. And really importantly, they put themselves closer to the Democratic Party. For the Republican Party. And you can see that that swing voter number, that swing voter dot is only 1 point away from where they think Republicans are. It's almost 2 points away from where they think Democrats are. So they liked our candidates, but that doesn't mean they loved our party. So that meant that when we were facing historical headwinds and the anchor of this damaged party brand, our candidates had to do near impossible things to get elected. These are 9 women who we actually helped with Shield PAC, which was Third Way's very first super PAC, to try to help them distance from this party brand, because we knew that if they were seen as a generic Democrat, they weren't going to win their races. They had to spend millions and millions of dollars creating their own brand to get away from the one that our party has. And they were able to do it. 8 of the 9 of these women actually came back to office, but we shouldn't have to do that. We should give them a better head start in 2024. And in the post-election polling, you could see how distant their brand would be from the Democratic Party. So we asked both Abigail Spanberger's voters overall, and then of the people that we contacted with Shield PAC, to describe Abigail Spanberger. These are the results of what they said in an open-ended question. You can see that even in the orange, which is all of her voters, that's not how people describe the Democratic Party. Those are just words about Abigail Spanberger. And on the folks that were contacted, they really got the idea of Abigail Spanberger not being for defund the police. She had her own brand, and it was supporting law enforcement. So this is great, and Spanberger's still in office, and we're so glad, but we can't continue to saddle our candidates with this damaged brand, especially in certain states. So Simon talked a little bit about the fact that this was not a national election. That was absolutely true. And in states where we saw actual election deniers on the ballot, or literally abortion on the ballot, Democrats won. We did great in Michigan. Super exciting. But then in states where maybe people were a little skeptical that abortion was actually going to be outlawed, or the person that was on the ballot wasn't a literal election denier or was a little quieter about it, we lost. That means that people in these bluer states where we saw a lot worse outcomes, California, Oregon, New York, they were more worried about Democrats going extreme than they were about Republicans going extreme. And these blue states are going to continue to give us that problem if people do not think that Democrats can be trusted with the keys of the car. So the final proof point is one that Catherine's going to love too, and we're very soon going to post the awesome graphic at the end here. So I hope all of you tweet it. But the far left groups are very loud. They've been doing this for 3 cycles. They've been trying to take out incumbent Democrats, spending a bunch of money on things that maybe aren't adding to the majority at all, and they spent millions again this cycle, and they got nothing. In a race in Oregon where they took out an incumbent Democrat, they frittered away a winnable seat. They added to insurrectionist speaker's majority. Biden won that district by 9 points, and we lost it. When you look at a similar district, almost ideologically identical, Greg Landsman in Ohio, he won. Even in the blue districts where they may say, oh, it's not as damaging, we saw very, very narrow results in a district that Biden won by 13 points. 13 points. The Our Revolution candidate eked it out by 2. This is not good. And you look at somebody like the New Dem candidate in Illinois 13, she added to Biden's margin. She won by 12 in an actually slightly less blue district. So we can see over and over again the results of all of this. When you add it all together, this is the report card. The New Dems Action Fund flipped 32 seats in 2018 and gave us the majority. 3 seats in 2020, the only ideological caucus to be able to flip seats. They did so in 2020. And again, same record this year, only ideological caucus to turn a red seat blue was the New Dems Action Fund for 7 flipped seats, and I think that deserves a round of applause. By contrast, theirs doesn't look as good. Not a single seat has been added to the majority by these groups in 3 cycles. So I think we have our answer about which direction we should go. So the upshot of all of this is that extremes versus mainstream is going to be the defining contrast of our politics moving forward, and we absolutely have to own it. And part of that, sure, is talking about how they're extreme, but that is not sufficient. If we do not make sure that we are seen as the mainstream choice that swing voters and persuadable voters can trust with the keys to the car moving forward, it doesn't matter how extreme their candidates are. We have to be a palatable alternative. So that is all of you speaking up, helping to define the Democratic brand as mainstream so that we can defend democracy yet again in 2024. Thank you. I have 2 questions before I get the hook. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take a question. So for us as state and local leaders, how do we functionally separate ourselves from that national narrative? Because a lot of stuff that you're talking about that we're doing, and we're doing like the bread and butter work on the ground that's focused on the economy, but then we got to respond to national conversations that may be opposite of what we're actually doing. So that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the reasons that we need to fix the brand, because if you're a state and local candidate, you don't have millions of dollars to spend on defining your own brand. You need to be able to rely on the D to do something for you. So I think it's absolutely about making sure that you emphasize hard work and what you're doing for the people. But it's also sometimes about pushing back on bad ideas from our own party. You know, I think that one of the most powerful things we saw, and David Shore has done a bunch of research on this, the most persuasive ads in the midterms were the ads where people said straight to camera, "I don't support defunding the police." Because that was what they were hearing on the other side, was Democrats want to defund the police. When you say, "No, I don't," then you can move on to what you do want to do. And I think too often we're afraid of the Twitter reaction to, you know, some of these things. And listen, I get a lot of Twitter hate all day long. Please don't go back and look at my feed after I said we shouldn't have canceled student debt. But you got to do it. You got to realize that Twitter is not real life, and you have to be able to say, sometimes my party has bad ideas too. One more. Molly.
I heard you got a shout out.
Oh yeah, I looked for you.
Thanks so much for the presentation. Awesome to see the win numbers. I did want to come back to primaries. Just for those of you, I ran for Congress. I wasn't successful. I got primaried hard from the left. A lot of national money came in, and I tried to navigate staying in the center, and it was really tough. But I want to just ask you, I guess, to share your advice for other candidates, because it will happen when you decide to run for higher office or when you run again, that we're seeing this real fracturing of the party. We're seeing Our Revolution come in. We're seeing Justice Democrats. We're seeing the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We're seeing Bitcoin, but maybe not anymore, playing in all sorts of races. We can talk about that after. But how to help leaders in this room make that decision early, figure out the path, and figure out how to organize to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 things I would say to that. One is we have to fight fire with fire and have money. You know, I mean, we can't just be like, we're the reasonable one, please pick us, and then they run a quadrillion dollars of ads and we're, you know, going door knocking and no one knows who we are. We have to fight fire with these groups, and I think there are some organizations that are trying to figure out how to do that, but we need to do that better. And the second is, you know, I think we need to remember too that the activists that show up, or the people that are, you know, even working on our campaigns sometimes, they're not representative of even Democratic primary voters. You know, one of the stats that that the, you know, Twitter is not real life presentation had in it that Debbie mentioned was that among Democratic primary voters, only 1 in 10 are on Twitter. So 90% of the folks that are voting for us in the primary are not part of that conversation. And I think we have to continuously remind ourselves that our voters do care about electability. Our voters do care about people being mainstream. And that's an advantage, because theirs, again, do not. So if we can, you know, keep our eye on the ball of what our base is actually, which is mainstream, moderate Democrats, and then make sure that we have the money behind it to really communicate that, I think we can win. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend Amy Walter, who is next up.